Okay guys, after lesson number 52, a lot of you said how you felt that your chess improved. You felt that you got to understand chess strategy a little bit better. So in this lesson, we're going to basically take those concepts and take them to the next level. And at the same time, of course, we're going to be reinforcing those same ideas. So I wanted to just start by asking you a few questions, and hopefully by the end of this lesson, of course, we'll bring your chess strategy to a new level. So the first question that I have for you, very simple. What do you think about e5 from the black pieces? Take your time, and this one, like we've done before, if you can, please let me know in the comment the answer to this question. If you don't feel like putting it in the comments, at least think about it. So what's up with this e5 move? Do you like it? Do you think it's good, bad, normal move? Just take your time and take a look at it. And then I have another question before we start, which is the following. In this position, what do you think of bishop c5? The same thing. Take your time and please let me know below that other answer. What do you think of bishop c5? So you could put e5, this is what I think. Bishop c5, this is what I think. It's gonna give me a very good understanding of where you are at, especially if you already went over lesson number 52. Now, the last question that I have is the following. What do you think of this position? And this time, please do take your time and evaluate the position. Pretend like you got to this position. Who do you think is better? Why? And try to come up with your plan. Not your next move, not your next 2-3 move, but your strategic plan. So notice that this is already, there are no queens on the board. I want to say it's more like a late middle game, and we have to have a clear understanding of what's going on. Now, we're looking at it from white's perspective, and I know that a lot of you are going to say, you know what, I like the white pieces better because we are ahead in development. We got these two knights out, but that's not enough, guys. There's one pattern here that you should know, especially if you went over lesson number 52. Now, I'm going to show you this game from the very beginning, and just so you know, this game became so important because it was played by Reti against Belgrano. And guys, this is a game that you could just Google it, it's gonna pop up. But the point is that you're gonna see how Reti, being this way stronger player, easily outplayed his opponent because of his understanding of chess strategy, because of his understanding of how the pawn structure could dictate the entire game. Now, the main thing that I wanted to know, that I wanted to see from you is, I wanted you to mention this d6 square. And you're going to see how the entire game, from the opening all the way to the end of the game, Reti was able to win the game because of that weak square. Notice that the e pawn is gone. So I asked you before, what do you think of e5? Well, I was expecting you to say, you know what? When that pawn pushes, since the Caro-Kann starts with c6, the c pawn is pushed, automatically d6 becomes weak. Then when they do e5, it accentuates that weakness on d6. But then finally, when the bishop went to c5, that was my other question. Well, that's a huge problem, guys. If you see that you have weaknesses on the dark squares, like in this case, your pawn structure is telling you this square is going to be weak, well, that bishop becomes even more valuable. And then to make things even worse, the white pieces Reti understood this and the queens were traded. So at least the queen sometimes could help you with that. Well, not anymore. So that bishop became really important. So if I go back a few moves, you're gonna see here, after bishop c5, this is what we call a natural move. We see a knight hanging on d4, and it makes sense to develop with a tempo on that knight. However, now you're gonna see how this square, the only piece I could defend it is going to be that bishop. Of course, the knights could do it, but it's not going to be so easy. So we really want to make sure that we keep that bishop. Many people do not understand this, and we just keep playing. As you're going to see, the black pieces here are just looking for combination, looking for more of exchanges, things like that. Reti is looking at the game from a way different angle. Now, I'm going to go all the way back again, guys, and let's take it one move at a time. So after c6, e4, d5, we get to the Caro-Kann defense, and then Reti chose to play knight to c3. Then take, knight takes, and in this game we have knight to f6. What I saw the most back in my days was bishop f5, and it got really interesting, but knight f6 is just as good. Now, in this game, instead of taking, Reti just went knight to g3. They're going to avoid that exchange, and then e5. So this is the move that I mentioned, that I asked you about before. Guys, again, I just explained it. Notice how c6 was pushed. There's only one pawn controlling d6. Don't forget, in chess, it is inevitable to push the pawns. You cannot play a chess game without pushing pawns. But every time you push a pawn, it's inevitable to create weaknesses. So now b6 has one less pawn. The moment we push the a pawn, that's going to be a hole in black's territory. Well, the same thing with d6. Now, for as long as you keep the dark square bishop, you're going to be fine. But you got to remember that. Now, after e5, knight f3. And by the way, guys, taking on e5, the black pieces are counting on queen a5. So they could easily do check, and then they pick up the pawn, right? So that's in the air. Even I think, even if they took the queen, king takes, this could be also good for the black pieces. But just, I think queen a5 is what they're counting on. So the white pieces, of course, they did not take on e5. Instead, we have knight to f3, and after pawn takes d4, we have to make a decision. Do we take with the queen, or do we take with the knight? Well, those of you, I think this was a video that I made for the members only, so maybe a lot of you didn't see it, but there's one line of the Ruy Lopez where we see this early capture with the queen. So we trade queens early, and it has to do with the fact that we're confident about the end game that we're getting, which is better for us. So in this case, we're taking with the queen because the queen is one of those few pieces left to protect d6. So after queen d4, queen takes, and then knight takes d4, only the bishop is going to be controlling d6. Guys, again, since very early in the game, that was move number 5 when they did e5. From that moment on, the white pieces are keeping their eye on d6. Maybe no one else paid attention to it, but anyone who is trained enough, they're going to keep an eye out for it. So queens are removed, knight goes to d6, and now the knight is hanging. Of course, the black pieces go bishop c5. Now, I think it was Reti who said, do not trust logical moves. So be careful with logical moves. Be careful with natural moves, okay? So bishop c5, very natural, very logical, but be careful with that. Now, bishop c5, and of course, we're going to defend by developing a piece. So bishop e3, and after knight d5, attacking the bishop. Now, notice how the black pieces are following, again, a very simple logic. So this is more of an open position. I want to remove that bishop. Besides, if I get to do that, I'm going to get them an isolated pawn. So all of this makes sense, but Reti, who of course understand this, they know that in this position, the bishop is superior to the knight. He doesn't really mind it because he understands the weakness on d6 is more important than the bishops. So instead of just moving the bishop or anything like that, he just went knight to e4. Why? Because he's going after the last defender of d6. So after knight e4, we have knight takes e3, and then finally he accomplishes his objective. Since move number 5, he's looking for ways to completely create that weakness on this. So knight to c5, and that's it. No bishop, no queen, no pawns to defend d6. That's it, guys. Now, the black pieces, they take on f1, they're successful at getting rid of the bishops, and after rook f1, this is the position that I showed you before. Now, the thing about this position is that, yes, we talked about it, we evaluated it, but even if you understand that d6 is weak, you're going to place a knight there. This is from lesson 52. And we learned back then that if you see a potential outpost, you need to identify it, of course. You need to secure it. Secure it means eliminating pieces that could kick you out of there. And that's what we did. We eliminated the bishop. The pawns are already gone. That's a very nice square. But then what to do when the knight gets there? We talked about it on lesson 52. And that's one of the main reasons why we're having this lesson. We need to reinforce that. A lot of you guys, I see your games. I see some of you sending me games. Oh, look, I got an outpost. I got my knight there. But when I keep going through the game, you do not capitalize on it. Having the knight on that square is not enough. It's not like a race that you get there, you won. No, once you get the knight there, you need to know what to do with the knight. And that's exactly what I want you to see in this game. Now, after rook f1, we have pawn to b6. They're kicking us out, and they need to move the bishop. They have to develop. That's one of the biggest problems. Well, at that point, we got to move the knight, and it should be very obvious where you're going to put that knight next. We know that we're looking for that d6. Well, where can the knight go to put pressure on d6? Because we want to put a knight on d6. So, of course, we go to e4, and you're going to see how every single move from this moment on is very logical. It's like the board is asking for it. So you don't have to be a master to do these moves, because if you understand that it's all about d6, you're going to know where your pieces go. So knight e4 happened. Now castling finally, and then the white pieces are going to castle to the queen side. Very logical, anyone who have done this move. But now notice how not only is the king safe, there are two other things. Number one, guys, this is looking more and more like an endgame, and we know one of the main things to remember in the endgame is that the kings have to be active. So my king, by castling to the queen side, I'm 1 and 2 squares from getting to the center. The black pieces, they castle to the king side, so that's going to take them a little bit longer to get to the center, right? So that's one thing, but then more importantly, when they castled queen side, the rook lands on this open file, and this 6 is going to continue to be confiscated by the white pieces. Very important. And that's another thing. If your opponent has a weak square like that, you want to open up the lines, the files, the diagonals, for you to be able to control it. So castle queen side makes sense. Then pawn to c5, attacking your knight. And I'm not even going to ask you, I'm not even going to ask you guys, because I'm trusting that you know where that knight goes. We have to move the knight. Where do you think it goes? Of course, we need to go towards d6. So we're going to go knight b5, knight to d6. So knight b5 goes, and we're already controlling that square with 1, 2, and 3. Very, very nice square for our knights. So after knight a6, and this is a very sad move, because of course we're hitting c7 and they have to do something about it. Now, I know that we're interested on d6, but if they let us, we're going to get that rook. So knight a6, our pieces keep going towards our objective. The black pieces continue to be passive. Look at that knight at the edge. So after knight a6, it is time to place our knight, one of our knights, on d6. So we already secured the outpost. Now we're going to occupy it. Third, we're going to utilize that knight in the outpost. And that's one of the most important things I wanted to show you here in this lesson. Now, the question to you is, which of the knights would you put on d6? Take your time, do not rush, make sure that you have a good reason for it. Don't be like, you know what, I think either one is the same. No, there's one that makes more sense than the other. All right, guys, so I want to put a knight on d6, but I want to make sure that the knight that I do not move can remain where it is to support that other knight, right? So if I go ahead and push the b pawn to d6, notice that they could do at some point f5 and kick this knight out. And this knight is perfect here to replace the other, to support the other knight. So instead, we go knight e to d6, they cannot kick us out, and this knight on b5 is going to be there for a long time. Not to mention that it has the benefit of preventing the black knight from going to c7. So now I have my knight in the outpost, and the other knight is going to stay there to support it, to replace it in case it is necessary. Now, something else. We're going to talk about now what we do from this moment on to win the game. But it's very important. This knight, we don't have to wait for this knight to be captured to bring the other knight in. Sometimes this knight goes to do something else, and then the other knight is ready to occupy that square. And your opponent never gets a break from that pressure. Now, once we have the knight in the outpost, let me actually go ahead and do the next move for black. So we have bishop e6. They finally developed their minor pieces, but they're still in trouble. Now, what happens is a lot of us, including myself, we get the nice knight in the outpost, and then we don't know what to do. Well, we learned on lesson number 52. I showed you like 3, 4, 5 examples from elite players from classical games. I showed you one of my games where once the knight was on the outpost, we knew that we had to continue to attack using the squares that the knight is controlling. So from here, the knight is controlling f7, f5, b7, b5. So if I want to attack, I need to use those squares. Now, the key is, in this case, we're more concerned about f5 and f7 because that's where the king is. So I need to unleash an attack on that king using the support of the knight. So that's how it's important to have the knight on an outpost like this. The knight is in black's territory. We need to look at the squares that the knight is controlling so that we can put pressure on it. So after knight to d6, bishop e6, of course, we're going to continue with f4. Remember, f5, we're going to use the help of our knight to put pressure on it. If we don't do this, if we just stay there quiet and then move our pieces around, that knight doesn't mean anything. So f4, g6, they don't want us to do f5. Okay, so now we're going to continue with h3. What's the idea? Well, g4 and then f5. We need to focus on attacking that king. So h5, and now we cannot do g4. Okay, so rook f2. Notice how the rooks are getting ready to be doubled. Also, the rook could come over, slide over through the second rank. So it is important that we get ready for that attack. Now, guys, this next part, I'm not going to really go deep into it. To me, it's enough that you see this in action again. The knight got to the outpost after being secured. Well, now we're going to use it to help us attack. So it's going to support that attack. So, and pay attention to it. d6, f5, f7. So after king to g7, we got f5 finally, no need to prepare it anymore. And now you're gonna see that if things open up, if the lines open up on the king side, the rooks are gonna be ready to come over and attack. So pawn takes, knight takes f5. You see the knight went from d6 to f5. And you might be wondering, okay, why do I want to trade my powerful knight for that bishop? Well, guys, if they give us that bishop, we're gonna take back. And look, isolated pawn, our rook is so active, we're going to double up on it. The other knight is going to come over. We have this under control. So that bishop that they have right now is doing a lot of defense. So I don't think they're going to give it up. If they give it up, it's only going to help us. So they took on f5, then king g6, and guess what? The other knight goes from the queen side towards the center, where that knight could help us, and it is using the same outpost going to d6. So again, from lesson number 5, the black pieces created that weakness, and the white pieces waited, they occupied it, and now that's exactly how they're going to lose because of d6. Imagine this pawn being on c7. That would have never been the case. So again, after knight b to d6, rook to d8, so they keep bringing pieces over. And then the question for you now is, what would you do as the white pieces? And you don't have to answer this one, just think about it yourself. You get to this position, you know that you have a critical moment, a critical position. How do you continue? You have to make sure that you do something that is consistent with this position. Well, at this point, we have knight e7, king goes to g7, and then pawn to g4. What is this for? Well, we're offering a pawn for free, only to open up files towards that king. That's all we need. If I could right now, I would just give these pawns away for free. I would just remove them from the board, because what I need is lines to attack the king. And this knight, notice how the knight came to e7. Now it is controlling g8, g6, and even this knight could come over to f5 now. So these two knights, they are letting the other knight use these key squares. f5, f7, we're putting pressure on it with the knight and the rooks, e7, all of those squares. Now, after g4, they took, we take back, and of course, they're not going to capture on g4. That would be suicide. So instead, knight to c7, trying to hurry up and bring the knight into the defense. Then rook d2, so that rook that was on the second rank is coming over to create this battery. Now, simple, we're threatening to do knight f5 check, discovery on the rook. So the rook has to move away, or they gotta get the king out of that threat of the check. So the black pieces do a very interesting move, which is king f6, and now they're saying, okay, if you do something like check, I'm going to get the knight, and I continue to defend the rook. So we couldn't do that. Instead, knight c6, we hit the rook, the knights keep dancing around, bothering the black pieces, and then the rook goes to a8. Now guys, a lot of you might be thinking, you know what? I don't think I'll have come up with all of these moves. It's a little bit confusing. How would I know where the knights should go? Well, it doesn't matter. As long as you understand what the strategic plan, where you should be doing, you're going to be fine. Maybe you don't do these exact same moves, but as long as you are using those squares, as long as you are attacking the king, as long as you are using your rooks, you're going to be fine. You cannot just be moving these pawns right now, things like that. You got the knights, you got the initiative, you have to utilize it. So knight c6 makes sense because we're attacking that rook, and the knights are confiscating all of these squares. So they had to, that rook that was active, they had to send it very passive to a8. So rook f1 now check. Notice how the knight is not letting the king hide. So it has to go back to g7. Then knight f5 check. Again, if you give me that bishop, less defender that you have, and you help me open up lines towards the king. So the king goes to g6. Now the other knight, see, the two knights are working together. So knight e5, king g5, knight d6, look, from f5 to d6, d6 to f5. And guys, very simple. The knight is going to d6 to put pressure on f7. We have two knights and the rook putting pressure on f7. So I know that I've said it now like 100 times, but it's the same thing. From the moment we got to d6, we talked about f5 and f7. So we just need to remember that. And if you put the right amount of pressure, they're just going to collapse. So f6, just getting away from that. Then knight e4 check. And notice that I'm going faster now. I don't want to analyze the different variations because it's not about tactics. It's not about calculation. It's about this strategic concept. So after the king moves, of course, we get the knight. So let me go back here. f6, getting away from that pressure on f7, but then the knights have check, and the king cannot even stay closer to defend. They move, give me the knight. Now, I'm sorry, give me the pawn. Now, we don't take with the rook because we are attacking. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces working together to attack that king. So we don't want to trade the rook. We need the rook on the board. So knight f6, king g7, then g5, we're going to secure the knight, and then knight d5, we cannot get the knight because our rook is hanging on f1, so we wish we could take right now, but we can't. So instead, we move the rook out of the way to the open file. Now, if I could get to h7, that's going to be checkmate. So rook h8, then check, king g8, we double up, and now we throw it in to do knight f6. Again, the same battery that we put before on the d file. Now we have it on the h file. So the king goes to h7, check. If the king tries to go away, well, we have knight g6. That's a very annoying fork. And again, you can see how the two knights are just overwhelming. And guys, after king h7, knight f6, the black pieces simply resigned. Now, I'm going to leave it here. I hope that you appreciated how Reti went from the opening, the moment they did e5. Reti was already paying attention to e5. And then little by little, he focused on eliminating the defender of d6. And don't forget, guys, that you could find this game on the internet. Just put the name of the players. And this is such a famous game that you're going to find it quickly. Now, before I let you go, I'm going to leave you a quick homework. And if you could, if you want, just do it on your own. It's going to help you put this in practice. But if you can, if you have the time, just let me know in the comment the evaluation where you do next from this position. So take your time. Like always, we're going to talk in the comments, and I'll see you next time.